Our main character is Ao, who lives on an island with his friend Naru. She suffers from some illness due to her special ability, known as Du-Ta. That night, they both went into the forest to find a sloth that Naru had saved from a fire. He wanted her to leave it in the forest, but she felt it would be dangerous for it to be alone without a family. Ao found it and brought them both home, while he had to go pick the remaining mangoes. He wanted Naru not to go out at night, but she said if Ao wasn't back by a certain time, she would call the police. Meanwhile, a young man named Gazel was transporting goods for the Japanese military with two friends who were suspicious and distrustful of the equipment given to Gazel by the Japanese military. While testing the device, their vehicle suddenly malfunctioned, causing him to crash toward the beach, nearly hitting Ao. Gazel was angry, not knowing what Ao was doing there, but Ao claimed he almost died because Gazel didn't know how to drive. His friend came to stop Gazel because they still had work to do. As he went back to get the cargo, Ao accidentally obtained some kind of ring. Suddenly, one of Gazel's other friends discovered that his vehicle's engine was severely damaged in a way they'd never seen before. He knew Ao lived at Mr. Fukai's house, who had parts for this type of vehicle, so he wanted Ao to hand over some parts. Suddenly, Gazel's broken vehicle showed strange reactions, and moments later it exploded, creating a pillar of brilliant energy visible across the island. Ao ran ahead while the friends wanted Gazel to escape before things got more chaotic. A satellite in space accidentally caught the signal from the earlier explosion and knew something would definitely happen. Ao managed to run home to let Naru know he was okay, but she knew something big had happened. Gazel and his group had to escape after seeing a huge creature appear on the beach. Gazel wanted to escape immediately to avoid encountering Japanese forces in this chaos. Meanwhile, at sea, a warship recognized that the light emanating from the island seemed very dangerous. Ao was forced to evacuate with Naru and the sloth, and he accidentally saw something gigantic appear where the light was. They crashed on the roadside, and Naru didn't know what was happening. People were gradually being evacuated. Ao knew the thing from earlier was a die monster, and he was worried about what to tell his grandfather. When he got home, he found his grandfather preparing to go to the hospital. His grandfather wanted him to prepare for tomorrow's initiation ceremony. Ao just watched his grandfather leave without mentioning what was happening on the other side of the island. Meanwhile, Gazel's group successfully delivered their goods to the client, but realized Gazel was missing one item, the one Ao had taken. After dinner, Ao called Naru to check on her situation. He didn't dare visit her house because her father always disliked him. They argued for a while about Ao always using this excuse not to visit her house. After arguing, Ao gave up and hung up. The next morning, Gazel's group returned to the beach to search for the item, as the client gave them 12 hours to find it. Only a huge crater remained on the beach. Unable to find it, they thought Ao might have taken it. Gazel felt his group was in trouble because so much had happened in just one night. There were no sounds around except for the ocean. Meanwhile, during Ao and Naru's school initiation ceremony, two light pillars similar to the previous night suddenly appeared. The organization in space had prepared to send people down to deal with the situation. Ao, having lost track of his grandfather and Naru, went searching when a meteor fell. He tried calling, but the lines were down, and people wanted him to run away. But the strange thing from last night came back again and started destroying everything. He ran away helplessly, realizing humans couldn't fight back. Suddenly, the ring fell out and started glowing. When he picked it up, he remembered his mother had a similar ring. Gazel's group found him and demanded the ring back, but he resisted and refused to hand it over. Understanding Ao's stubbornness, Gazel decided to take him along, thinking they might be able to do something to save the island. At that time, the island's navy received a message from the National Guard that they must let the Japanese ship leave. The Japanese forces didn't want to get involved, so they would leave as requested. Some device on the Japanese ship had emitted a signal, and the sea monster suddenly turned its attention towards it. Gazel had informed Ao that this ring was the key to a Japanese weapon. He instructed to deliver it to them even though they were enemies, so they could fight the monster instead. But if the Japanese forces wouldn't help, they would steal that weapon. After identifying the ship, Gazel drove there intending to carry out the heist. He shot a grappling hook onto the ship, causing the Japanese forces to fire warning shots. Suddenly, the monster fired directly at the ship, causing it to sink gradually and dragging Gazel's group down with it. Al broke the glass window and fell from the car. He managed to grab onto the device on the ship, and Gazel told him since he had its key, he should go in and fight. He climbed in and started up the machinery to prepare for battle. Ao's grandfather was looking for him at this time and accidentally found Naru's family. Ao had sunk and wasn't very skilled yet, so he was just trying to figure things out when suddenly the ring synchronized with the machine and gave him control. He piloted the aircraft above water, and Gazel knew he had succeeded. Meanwhile, the space organization accidentally caught signals from the machine Ao was piloting, even though it had been missing for over a year. Ao had piloted the aircraft past the monster and transformed it into armor with a surfboard. He gathered his courage and charged into battle. Naru's father didn't like Ao's grandfather because he had saved Ao's mother and caused the island to suffer misfortune from that action. However, he believed the children weren't related to this matter, and neither was Ao. At this point, Ao was trying to fight the monster, but without weapons, he couldn't do anything. He had to lure it away to think of a counter-strategy. But the International Guard organization had just arrived and noticed that the robot's pilot was an amateur, because no one would lead the monster to that meteor. Ao just realized he had made a mistake bringing it here. However, thanks to bringing it here, the meteor had interfered with his energy and the monster couldn't determine his location. He then burst out of the smoke, causing it to charge and cut off one of the robot's arms. He caught it and used that arm to stab straight into the monster's head, destroying it. When he woke up, he found the islanders throwing stones at him because of his turquoise hair. He also received signals from the International Guard team, so he had to pilot the robot away. The girl piloting the green robot followed to search and accidentally found him floating on the water. She saved Ao, and since she didn't know he had piloted the robot, she had to let him go. When he got home, he heard that the military was questioning his grandfather because now Ao had revealed his nature and was reported by the islanders to have turquoise hair. He was startled to check the mirror and saw his hair color was now like his mother's years ago. She had also faced discrimination and had tried to dye this hair black. Meanwhile, Naru accidentally heard about Ao's problem and escaped from the infirmary. She found Ao at his usual spot, and he knew he was being hunted because of his hair color and because he was a foreigner like his mother. She wasn't disgusted by him, so he decided to show her the robot he had used to protect the island. He didn't intend to use it again because that would make him more hated. Meanwhile, the red aircraft was still at the meteor site when military helicopters happened to arrive. When calling back to her teammates, the girl piloting the red aircraft informed them she had gotten into trouble. Naru and Ao went looking for the sloth, but her father and others had surrounded and taken Ao away. Meanwhile, Gazel's group had found the robot but couldn't figure out how to move it, as they couldn't control it and moving it would be too obvious, and Ao didn't want to pilot it. Meanwhile, the blonde girl who had saved Ao met a little girl asking for help, so she had to go get her aircraft to help. The commander here didn't understand why only young people could pilot those aircraft. Since the Ao was mentioned, the boss asked the commander for more information about the Ao and assigned the task of meeting with the island's high-ranking officials to a female junior officer. She wanted to research the meteorite to prevent the kaiju from coming, but they refused because they had never heard of a monster appearing in the same place twice. She then went to pick up the pink-haired female pilot and instructed her to find the blonde-haired one and keep an eye on that meteorite. At this time, Ao had a conversation with the person who captured him. He revealed that he had met Ao and his mother 10 years ago. Naru's grandmother also told her about what happened in the past. 13 years ago, Ao's mother accidentally fell from the sky. When the Americans came, Ao's grandfather hid his mother away. Everyone thought both Ao and his mother were aliens or foreigners. Ao's side also heard that when he was 3 years old, the meteorite appeared near the island, so his mother was captured by the Americans. The meteorite then contracted, making people think his mother was the cause of the disaster. He believed he did nothing wrong, and these were unfounded accusations, but the people still hated him. Meanwhile, Gazelle wanted to find a way to save Ao, and he was going to do something crazy. The boss also came here because he wanted to meet Ao. Just as he went in to meet Ao, Gazelle and his friends accidentally crashed in and put Ao in the car in an instant. Coincidentally, the person who captured Ao was Gazelle's father. He opposed his father because he felt it was unfair to Ao. They had always treated him badly and blamed him, while they were the cowards who refused to accept this opportunity for independence. When he took him up to the sky, they accidentally encountered a larger kaiju up there. But Ao didn't want to fight and just wanted to go meet the grandfather. When he arrived, he saw that the grandfather's clinic had been burned down. The grandfather didn't allow him to hate them because ultimately, it was because they loved the island and wanted to protect it that they acted this way. He saw that the grandfather still kept photos of him and his mother. He changed his mind and wanted the grandfather to run away. He met up with Gazelle's group again and decided to fight. Meanwhile, the International Protection Team had to send people to fight with the kaiju ship. They informed the military that the monsters could neutralize basic human weapons like missiles, but weapons from robots could pierce through. The red aircraft transformed and fired a few shots first. The enemy fired back, but couldn't hit because she was near the meteorite. The blue aircraft also flew by and fired some shots. Then the enemy released 3 small monsters. Both split up to shoot them down and returned to positions near the meteorite to hide. They then released all the monsters to attack. Ao had now entered the robot because if he didn't fight now, he would regret it later. He remembered when his mother showed him the ring and told him that with this, the robot would remember him, and it did remember Ao's real name. He piloted the aircraft into battle, and during this time, Ao's appearance accidentally made him a target for the military. The boss's side tried to call Ao, but he didn't understand how to use the radio, so the robot set up the simplest mode for him to control. The 2 female pilots saw humans shooting at monsters excessively with jets and had to rush up, one behind and one in front. And this blonde-haired girl was the one called by the boss and asked to watch over Ao. He had now figured out how to transform into a robot and take out weapons, but he forgot about the missing arm and dropped the weapons. He accidentally went into the danger zone, forcing the blonde-haired girl to come save him. She brought him back to the ground and realized he was the person she saved before. She informed him that he had just entered the monster's activity zone. There would be an area surrounding their ship where they could act. Since they were now on the ground and out of range, they wouldn't attack randomly. She wanted him to stay put while she returned to fight. He didn't want to sit idle, so he asked her and her teammate to lure away all the monsters while he would charge at the main ship to destroy it. This female officer didn't trust an amateur piloting a broken robot like him, but the boss was willing to bet on Ao. Both the blonde-haired girl and Ao could now communicate via radio, and Ao only had over a minute to deal with the ship. He flew behind her and received the weapons she dropped. Since Ao's robot was the first generation, he could be compatible with all weapons from other robots. He sprayed bullets all over the ship, and by the time the monsters discovered it, he had reached the engine and fired into it, causing everything to explode. That day, Gazelle's group discovered the International Guard team doing something with the meteorite. He had one friend act as bait and then snuck in with the other person. Both discovered the 2 aircraft taking out something from inside that looked exactly like what he had seen in the car the night before. The meteorite also stopped working. He immediately ran back to prevent Ao from being taken away. At this time, the female officer and the boss had gone to Naru's house to meet Ao's grandfather. They wanted to take Ao away for care, but the grandfather wanted to let Ao decide. Naru also wanted to know where Ao was because without her, Ao would fall into despair. A few days later, Ao was brought to the city. This older brother would be responsible for guiding him. Right in the city, he still saw many people protesting against war, and the brother said these incidents happened every day. He took him to meet his sister for a bowl of noodles, but when his sister went inside, she was trying to contact the intelligence agency to turn Ao in. He overheard this, and the brother, feeling indignant, took him away. He took him to the boss's place where Ao met Naru again. The boss let Ao hear his grandfather's message that the robot belonged to his mother, and she had once driven it into enemy territory and never returned. He worried Ao would do the same, so he hoped Ao wouldn't die. No one knew what happened to his mother, so he decided to join to find out the truth about her. Naru also wanted to go, but because of her illness, he couldn't let her. Naru gave him the sloth so he could always remember her. The military jets from the island came to try to capture Ao. He went to the robot that the brother had hidden and drove it to the International Guard ship and left. When he got to the command room, he wondered where the sloth was, but no one had seen it. The sloth had accidentally found Gazelle's group of friends because they had snuck aboard. Ao could now get to know the two girls. The blonde one was Flor and the pink-haired one was Elena. He could now see their headquarters. It looked quite nice, but he didn't understand much about why they built it this way. When arriving at the landing site, a whole technical team was prepared to maintain the aircraft, and Ao met Alex. He was the technical department head and needed to meet him. He said the arm would need 4 hours to fix, and he would adjust it to match his high-speed fighting style. The boss called him to follow, but he was worried about the sloth, so the boss said Officer Rebecca would look for it instead. She accidentally found 3 young stowaways who all fell straight towards her. She kicked Gazelle away, and he wanted to meet her commander. Ao was now being taken for examination. Analysis showed he differed from normal people in one point: his eyes, because they could see electromagnetic waves that normal eyes couldn't see, such as electromagnetic waves or ultraviolet rays. When he wondered about himself, the boss said he was completely normal. This hair color was just inherited from his mother. Flora then took him on a tour of the base and let him know there were many other pilots besides them. She led him to the dormitory area, but realized she forgot to ask her superiors about his quarters. Suddenly, the TV reported that the sloth was running around the base randomly, and I wonder how the sloth could run so fast. Ao was worried, so he decided to run and look for it. Meanwhile, Gazelle had gone to meet the chairman of this place and asked him about what he had people take out of the meteorite. He began to wonder if this organization was really a volunteer organization as the world knew it or not. The chairman found them interesting, so he would compromise. Ao at this time went to a crowded area and saw his sloth with another pilot team, while Fleur accidentally ran into Gazelle and his group who were going with Rebecca. He recognized her as the person who went with Ao, so he slipped away first. They just left without explaining anything, leaving Fleur not understanding what happened. While on the ship, Rebecca received news that a meteorite had fallen. Ao had now met this uncle's pilot group. Bruno was the leader, and these were all his members. The smallest girl here, despite her appearance, was the same age and considered herself Ao's senior. Suddenly Bruno received a mission and called the whole group to leave. They returned the sloth to him and then left with Bruno. Ao's group's boss came to the command room and discovered Gazelle's group there. The chairman said they would now be part of the organization. Ao was now brought to the dormitory by Elena and left waiting outside. Fleur came and wondered why he was at the girls' dormitory. He used Elena as an excuse, which made her wonder since when they had become so close. Meanwhile, Bruno's group had begun to enter battle. 3 girls had gone up first when suddenly a kaiju rushed out, causing one person to fall. They kept appearing from behind the clouds, making them unpredictable. Bruno called for backup, and the command room decided to send Ao's group into battle. The boss didn't allow it because his group had just returned from battle, but there was no other choice. Fleur and Elena quickly received orders, and she told him that the organization originally just wanted to get his mother's robot back. So whether he wanted to continue with the fight or not was his choice, and no one would force him. He followed the two girls to the pilot changing room, and the boss showed him his own suit. All three then went to the hangar, and Al met Alex, who told him his aircraft had been repaired and could fly well, and the organization had also renamed this aircraft to the name his mother had chosen. They then officially took off and headed to battle. During that time, in the allied country that Al had just left, an arms trafficking boss recognized his subordinate was a traitor and had people point guns at him. Meanwhile, at a warehouse where smugglers stored weapons, the government had come to suppress the disorder. They tried to resist, but guns against tanks were impossible. Back with the boss, this subordinate had dealt with all the guards, but this person still didn't know his true identity. Someone emerged from the swimming pool, but only saw a woman. The other warehouse was in ruins, and the commander's men didn't understand why he wanted them to shoot back. But the commander had only been hiding and never ordered to shoot, and a person with transformation abilities also appeared before him. The woman from before had now taken the robot from the person in the pool and drove it straight to where the monster that the organization was targeting. Back to Al, the boss had him meet George, an AI in their system. George informed him of the exact position he needed to go to, and the mission was they would have to deal with the monsters while rescuing Bruno's 3 pilots. They had to go quickly because the command ship discovered Bruno was trying to go straight in. They suspected he would crash into the monster's ship to clear the way. They tried to get there as fast as possible, but it was still too late, and Bruno had sacrificed himself to show them the position of the monster ship in the clouds. The command ship wanted them to retreat because the explosion had disrupted the energy, making it difficult for their aircraft to fly near the monster ship. Suddenly, the robot that the girl from before had taken rushed in to help, fired a few shots, and then flew away. They then all returned, and the command ship wanted the group to try to rescue both the pilots and retrieve all damaged parts. When flying past where that girl was, she unexpectedly recognized the robot Al was piloting. Upon returning, Al went to the hospital to visit the pilots, and he went to meet the youngest one, Chloe. She had just woken up and met Al. He let her know everyone was okay and hid what had happened to Bruno. He stayed to watch over Chloe's sleep, but in the middle of the night he fell asleep too. She saw the command calling Al, so she listened and learned what had happened to Bruno, while Al was asleep, so they let him rest and launched themselves. Chloe woke him up, and he learned everyone had already gone into battle. He thought he was useless, so no one needed him, and began to blame himself, which Chloe couldn't stand. She thought everyone was just trying to protect him because he was sleep-deprived, and going out there would be like sacrificing himself. Chloe admitted she had tried to learn from Al by charging into the monster ship's activity zone, but this had backfired on them when they were counterattacked and failed. After hearing her encouragement, he decided to head out. The 2 girls tried shooting from a distance, but it wasn't effective, so Al came and asked them to provide covering fire to clear a path for him. He charged through the storm and grabbed onto one of the monster's abandoned ships. When it destroyed the small ships, it dropped more down, so he used them as stepping stones to climb up. Once he got close, he just had to punch through the monster's head and successfully destroyed it. Upon returning, he received praise from the boss. The next morning, he saw people coming to clean up Bruno's belongings. When he went to look, he saw that Bruno had always put the group's children first, and worked with the principle that it wasn't time for children to die. He was heartbroken that such a good person had passed away. Meanwhile, the girl with transformation abilities had come to attack the organization's entrance. She transformed continuously from one form to another and finally returned to her true form, a white-haired person who called himself Truth. Truth kept advancing toward the base, raising his hand like a gun, and bang, explosions kept happening without clear reason. Soldiers had to come to stop Truth, but he just destroyed the main gate and proceeded inside. Police who were dispatched to stop the intruder were all simultaneously blown away by the explosion. The commander called Al and requested both him and Fleur to stay in the room, and someone would come to pick them up. Fleur complained about having to stay in a boy's room, but she had entered there first without anyone forcing her. The commander also asked if Elena was with them because he had tried to contact her through emergency channels with no response. The superiors were discussing this intruder and would consider this attack as a declaration of war. And even though there was only one intruder, this couldn't be considered a minor matter. The superior then went out to inform Rebecca that the first priority was to ensure the pilot's safety, and depending on the situation, they might have to self-destruct the entire base. We then met Mirror, who was a fairly famous singer at this base and was supposed to have a performance, but it was now cancelled due to the attack. Her co-performer wanted her to evacuate soon, but she told them to go ahead because she had something to do. Mirror checked the base's cameras and discovered Truth seemed to be approaching this place, but when she looked up, he was already on stage. Soldiers ran out to stop him and asked where he came from. He didn't answer, but just said he would dedicate this performance to everyone in the base. He then grabbed the mic, jumped up and fired a shot that blew away all the soldiers. He then asked Mirror what she was doing here, and upon hearing she was a singer, he passed her by and left. Mirror later heard through radio communication that soldiers were gathering to protect the shelter, but Mirror realized Truth wasn't targeting that place. Gazel was vomiting violently when suddenly the bathroom exploded. Truth kept advancing while soldiers, in pursuit of him, didn't notice and stepped on Gazel and his friend. They cornered Truth, and he claimed they were preventing him from finding the world's secret. The command center noticed Truth was only going higher, not lower, so it seemed he was targeting the pilots rather than trying to maximize casualties. So the command center notified the engineers to get the pilots ready for battle. The chief engineer thought only one machine could deploy, but Rebecca thought one was enough, so she sent Al first. But just as he started the machine, Truth was right in front of him. He realized that Al was the person he had been looking for, and he also asked why Al was in that woman's machine. Al realized he knew his mother and became very angry. Rebecca pulled out her gun to threaten Truth, but he waved his hand and threw her away. Rebecca had to order Al to leave immediately. He started the aircraft and took off, but Truth still clung to the aircraft and noticed that Al was now using his mother's machine. He then transformed into a giant shadow, and no one heard anything more from Al. Meanwhile, the superiors had called Bruno's team back to fight after their rest period for injuries. They asked where Al was, and the superiors said something. Meanwhile, although Naru was sick, instead of resting, she sneaked away from her family to find her father's workplace. At this time, Gazel had also returned home to meet his father, who wanted Gazel to inherit his business, but he refused because his father had never treated him like a son. Additionally, he wanted to investigate the truth that the government was hiding from citizens before considering anything else. When Naru's father discovered her at his workplace, he got out of his car and questioned why she was there while sick. When she tried to say something, her father interrupted and demanded she return home immediately. She obediently turned back but fell ill on the way and was unexpectedly helped by Al. Al then led her back to her father's workplace despite them being forbidden to enter. Naru followed Al to an entrance inside, and although she found him strange, she chose to follow him. When Naru later asked Al about how different he was compared to before, he said he changed because of her. Al then threw away Naru's respirator, saying she didn't need it and should just breathe deeply. Naru suddenly felt much better and was no longer sick. The cocoon in the middle of the construction site suddenly released glowing dust particles and helped Ao and Haru float up. But while enjoying it, Haru was awakened back to reality. Unexpectedly, another Ao appeared and told Naru to stay away from the other one. When she looked again, the person beside her had become Truth. He remembered Ao and only now learned Naru's name. Ao demanded he stay away from Naru, and soldiers arrived at that moment, but he made the ceiling collapse to block their advance. He then flew away with Naru but later dropped her near his car. Truth simply got in the car and left. Seeing Gazel also driving a flying car, Naru grabbed his hand to get in with him. Ao piloted a robot to chase Truth, and he thought that Ao's existence might be related to the world's truth. But unexpectedly, Naru's existence was even more interesting. While Ao believed Naru was just an ordinary girl, Truth said he was too naive. He then transformed into a giant shadow, and Naru suddenly realized this shadow had appeared and protected her in her dreams. She then jumped from Gazel's car, and Ao had to quickly run to catch her. But Naru deliberately avoided Ao because she believed she could fly. She landed safely but still needed Truth to hold her before she lost balance and fell off the cliff. Ao ran over to tell Naru to stay away from Truth, but she stood up to protect him instead. She knew Truth was the missing piece she needed, and just being near Truth would allow her to fly. Truth then teleported away with Naru. Ao tried to grab Naru but missed and woke up at the base. Elena and Fleur informed him that he had been unconscious for 3 days. Fleur reminded him that he and Truth had chased each other for quite a distance, but when they found him, his aircraft had crashed while Truth had disappeared. Truth was subsequently wanted by the organization, and Ao was relieved that everything he saw was just a dream. However, Fleur regretfully informed him that what he dreamed was real because Naru had indeed been taken by Truth. The government was now disappointed with the base where Ao worked, as they had invested so much money only to have a terrorist easily enter and destroy everything. The next day, while engineers were sighing with relief that everything had stabilized, they suddenly saw Ao's aircraft take off. The chief engineer had to rush out and jump onto the aircraft to cut power and stop him. Rebecca and the commander later suggested that their job wasn't to chase terrorists, but to deal with monsters before they exploded. The chairman had to come ask how they planned to punish Ao. The commander hadn't decided yet, so the chairman wanted Ao to only receive a warning this time since he had helped Bruno's team before. The chairman saw the pilots as his children and didn't want to be too harsh. Fleur seemed touched by the chairman's words. The next day, while Ao was walking around, he discovered he was being followed wherever he went. Someone was tracking him. While passing by Fleur's place, Gazel also stopped by. Ao wanted him to stop following her and angrily left. Fleur wondered about him following Ao, and he revealed that he was ordered by the chairman to monitor her, but not secretly, rather openly like this to put pressure on Ao. He also knew Fleur was the chairman's daughter, and she had a poor relationship with her father, just like Ao. Soon after, a new mission appeared in a desert. The entire organization received the information early and deployed Ao's team. The chairman received a call from the minister at this time, so he went to his office to answer. The minister criticized his organization for letting a team leader die and allowing a terrorist to cause chaos in the base. The president couldn't help them because other officials were pressuring him during the election process, so their only way to prove their worth now was to handle what had just fallen into that desert. The commander was now working with Rebecca to outline the necessary strategy for this mission. Ao just learned that the chairman had sent someone to monitor her so much for treating pilots like children. What a lie. He also just learned that Fleur was the chairman's daughter. They then suddenly received information that the monster appearing this time was very similar to the type that appeared many years ago. It could cause continuous thunder and lightning in the sky and was very dangerous. Unexpectedly, superiors informed the commander to abort the mission by the chairman's order. The commander didn't want to disobey, so they turned back. They landed near some ruins, and Fleur knew that some organization was pressuring her father, and an organization big enough to do that must be the US government. George informed that the locals were currently protesting against the US government, with tensions so high that both sides were on the brink of war. So if they stirred up anything about the monster and caused an explosion, it would trigger war. Ao remembered what happened to her homeland and angrily argued that if they left things as they were, the people here would die. He then ran away and Fleur decided to follow him. They later met at an abandoned house. Fleur had heard about Ao also hating her father, so she felt they were very similar, saying she also hated her father. Ao wondered why she hated the chairman but still worked here. She told Ao that 5 years ago, she and her mother were involved in a terrible accident. At the hospital, doctors could only save one of them, so her father chose to save her instead of her mother. She understood that if her father had chosen to save her mother, she would have died, but she still hated him for making her live with this burden. The commander later found both of them and showed them the news the monster had caused significant damage to locals here, so the world had pressured and requested us government help these people. Therefore, the return order was cancelled and they could continue the campaign. The group then returned to the ship to begin action. Shortly after takeoff, the group officially got detailed images of this monster. This monster could release charged particles causing lightning strikes continuously. Although their robots were equipped with shields against monster attacks, these lightning strikes were independent attacks, so just one hit would shut down the system. The only way to win was to dodge all those lightning strikes. Easier said than done, but they had no time to think further, so Elena lowered down and started setting up guns to shoot down the monster. Ao and Fleur also quickly approached it so Elena could continue firing, but they discovered the monster was preparing to release lightning over a large area, so both had to retreat. Elena was unfortunately struck by lightning, so she shut down and needed to restart. The commander had to tell Ao and Fleur to wait for orders because they needed Elena to execute the plan. Suddenly, the group discovered the monster suddenly transformed into a chest-like form and moved very fast. Through calculations, they realized the monster intended to charge straight into the cocoon and fall right there. It was expected that many people would die if the collision occurred. The commander ordered everyone to return since they couldn't do anything more, but Ao refused and believed there was still a way. Before he could act, Fleur had already flown off. She flew up to the cocoon and wanted to prevent the collision. Ao came to help her. He also wanted to help her get revenge on her father by surviving to punch him in the face. They both then flew up together and tried to hold back the monster. They simultaneously fired at both sides of the monster, and it actually cracked, but the collision would happen in less than 30 seconds. Each second counted down, and finally, they managed to destroy the monster before the collision occurred. Although both were affected by the explosion, only the robot was damaged while the pilots remained safe. Both were happy they were still alive to return. Ao and Fleur then left and wanted to see the chairman's face after this incident. However, they immediately discovered that the footage on TV was faked by people at the base to deceive the US government. The chairman then revealed that the US government had questioned them about that footage because they had investigated and found that nothing had happened in the enemy city. But the chairman had reported back that they didn't know, and now the chairman needed the commander to help explain why they returned late. He just said the ship's engine was damaged, causing the delay, and that they hadn't intervened. Fleur and Ao then realized that the chairman had staged that footage to help them continue their mission. So basically, the chairman had saved many people. When the commander returned with Rebecca, they saw that Ao and Fleur had become much closer. Later, the Japanese military was planning to test a simulation of an artificial cocoon to help Japan rise to world leadership, as Japan had now been isolated by the Alliance and US government who refused to share information with them. While their economy remained stable, their military had fallen far behind other countries. Although the military wanted to develop strongly, they knew the citizens would certainly not support this as they only wanted to live in peace. However, they still saw this as necessary, so they decided to buy information from a hacker group about secret documents related to the cocoon that the US government had hidden. However, this plan of the Japanese military was leaked by an insider. Back to the pilot group, since it was a day off, Fleur and Elena decided to go to the swimming pool to relax, but Ao came and wanted them both to focus on training. However, Fleur argued that swimming was also training, and she knew Ao was anxious to rescue his girlfriend Haru, and his unwillingness to join swimming was perhaps because he couldn't swim. But he corrected her that he actually could swim. Meanwhile, the chairman had informed the commander about the Japanese military's intention to experiment with creating monster cocoons, and Ao's team's upcoming mission would be to secretly recover that cocoon from the Japanese military. Just then, Ao's group passed by the command room, and Ao noticed the chairman had just given some new directive to his commander. Not long after, Gazel's group was brought to Japan. After some troublesome immigration procedures, Gazel's group got through. The group then went to a hill near the military base to intercept and eavesdrop on signals. Since this was where the cocoon had fallen in Japan, it didn't take long for Japan to begin the research and exploitation process from this cocoon. They had now begun the research process. After a small test, the cocoon showed signs of activity, and the Japanese military was confident they had now completed the first step of their plan. Gazel's group was surprised to hear that the Japanese military's first step had succeeded. Ao's team was still out at sea waiting for instructions, as they couldn't advance further without being detected by Japanese patrol boats. While Ao wondered how much longer they would have to wait, suddenly a light column appeared signaling that monsters had arrived. The Japanese military immediately ordered the capture of the monster to use as a military weapon, believing that having the cocoon meant the monster wouldn't attack them. However, they were wrong when the monster still began to attack. At this time, Ao's group had landed their aircraft in the water to approach the cocoon. They were not allowed to transform unless absolutely necessary, because once transformed, it would be difficult for them to operate underwater for long periods. When Ao questioned why they had to move underwater instead of on land, the commander explained that their target this time was to retrieve quartz ore inside the cocoon. This was the monster's objective. If they could get the quartz ore and retreat safely, the mission would be successful. Originally, the organization's work had only been about retrieving quartz ore from cocoons, but due to the nature of this mission, they could destroy both the quartz ore and cocoon if necessary. While Ao still wanted to save people, the two girls suggested that the Japanese wouldn't be grateful even if he saved them. But as a son of Japan, he couldn't bear to watch his fellow citizens in trouble without helping. As Ao had rushed ahead, the commander could only tell the two girls to continue with their mission. The Gazel group no longer wanted to eavesdrop and preferred to go straight into the military base to get information. Suddenly, Ao shot up from underwater. He had observed around the base and saw that the explosion only occurred in one place, so the monster must be there. Meanwhile, as the Japanese military commander was trying to escape from the base, he saw Ao flying past and thought it was their robot. Unexpectedly, a soldier in the car shot the driver dead. He then transformed into Truth and claimed that the robot belonged to him, not to the commander. As he was about to deal with the commander, surprisingly, the Gazel group's car came rushing down from the mountain. Ao had now plunged into the water and detected the monster's signal. He carefully transformed and waited for the monster to approach. Just when he sensed its signal nearby, the monster was nowhere to be seen, but one of his legs was suddenly crushed. Gazel and his friends had gotten out of their crashed car when they accidentally encountered Truth again. Gazel noticed the gun on the ground and asked if Truth was responsible for this chaos. The two girls had now reached the area containing quartz, but when they opened it, they found only damaged quartz being reused by the Japanese military. Although these were just byproducts of the cocoon, such a large quantity was concerning, as concentrating a large amount of damaged quartz in one place could risk causing an explosion. Ao, still unable to locate the monster, was suddenly dragged deep underwater. The water pressure gradually damaged his robot, forcing him to cut off one leg to escape. However, the two girls had arrived to support him. He then realized the monster would reveal its true form when swimming in areas with fuel leakage. So he attacked the two girls' robots to release more fuel and expose the monster. Ao quickly grabbed the monster and squeezed it, causing it to explode. But the damage to his robot was too severe, and he began to sink. The two girls once again came to rescue Ao and pulled him to the surface. While Gazel was questioning Truth, the two girls flew past with Ao, causing Gazel to lose focus momentarily and allowing Truth to escape again. Upon returning, the two girls asked how Ao knew how to make the monster reveal itself, but he wasn't sure. Later, they met the Japanese military commander again, who had learned a lesson that Japan should continue focusing on economic development rather than arms race. However, Truth appeared shortly after and dealt with the commander's partner. He claimed to see through the commander's desire to rule Japan and wanted to cooperate to help him achieve greater goals. Not long after, at the Arizona Bank in America, a monster suddenly invaded. Although the US military fought hard to intercept the monster, they ultimately failed. This wasn't actually the first time America had been attacked by monsters. Al wondered if America would ask their organization for help if they were attacked again. The commander thought probably not, so Iki's entire team had to wait for orders at the border. Gazel and Rebecca were discussing with a US government official to get the US government to accept help from their organization. However, this person seemed unwilling to help and kept deflecting by talking about how he and Rebecca were former colleagues at a company, though now each had their own path. While working for the military, both had once eliminated an entire country during a conflict on an island. After handling a cocoon that fell on that island, civil war broke out, drawing them in. The US military quickly suppressed the island's forces. The world refused to help them. Gazel had heard about this incident, that the island was killing its own people so naturally no one wanted to help. However, the massacre that the world knew about was actually caused by their former company. They believed it was necessary for the world to develop as it has now. There was no right or wrong about any individual's fault. It was an action that all participants had to take responsibility for. Rebecca noticed he hadn't changed at all since then, while she hoped she had changed enough to make up for past mistakes. But he still thought she was doing similar work to what she did back then. While Al was waiting for orders, Naru's sloth suddenly brought him a book about the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Al realized the team's name was based on the Pied Piper, so he wondered about its meaning. The two girls said the commander named the team so only he would know the meaning. George then transformed into a literature teacher and explained the meaning of the Pied Piper story. Al didn't want to listen, so he took the sloth away, and when he returned, George was still talking. Suddenly, the chairman called to report that the US military had encountered another monster. But because this monster had a large area of effect, the military used infantry to intercept it. The commander unexpectedly asked the chairman's permission to take the whole team into battle. When the chairman refused, he defied orders and departed anyway. He then proceeded with Al into US territory. Al noticed the commander rarely disobeyed the chairman's orders. He said he had a bad feeling about the US military using infantry to intercept the monster, so he exceeded his authority to check the situation himself. They then entered the town where the monster was likely to fly over. They suddenly discovered a group of people who hadn't evacuated yet, so they went down to check the situation. When the commander asked why they hadn't evacuated, the group said that person prevented them from boarding the helicopter. He then revealed himself as Truth and wouldn't let anyone leave because they would be sacrifices for the monster's awakening. Al rushed up to reclaim Naru from him, but he used his power to prevent him from getting close. The US infantry had now failed against the monster once again, while Rebecca was being stalled by the official who still didn't want to accept help from their organization. When Al regained consciousness, he discovered Truth had teleported the entire shopping mall to a rocky mountain. The monster appeared right in front of them and released small monsters that flew toward the civilians. Some soldiers there tried hard to shoot down the small monsters, but they suddenly saw the soldiers and immediately afterward shot lightning that instantly killed anyone it hit. Fear began to overwhelm Al, causing him to freeze in place. The commander had to rush over to push him away and tell him to run inside quickly. Al ran for his life while the commander had to support his retreat. Truth claimed humans had completely misunderstood the nature of these monsters. The civilians then had to hide in the shopping mall as the small monsters were still patrolling outside. Rebecca now received word from the chairman that the monster was very different now because it had never identified humans as enemies before. But this time this behavior appeared as if it had evolved. The chairman wanted Rebecca to negotiate with that official quickly, and she was given full authority to set conditions if needed. Gazel then noticed Rebecca was still somewhat hesitant, and the reason must have come from the commander. The commander apologized to Al for bringing him to this dangerous place. He revealed that he was a soldier from the country on the island that Rebecca had previously eliminated. Although he lost a lot in that battle, he had no right to hold grudges as both sides were equally at fault. That's why he joined this organization to correct his own mistakes. However, since only minors could pilot the robots, he chose the name of the Pied Piper of Hamelin to see himself as someone leading children into battle. Al later walked around the shopping mall and discovered that the mannequins had been shot to pieces by the monsters. The commander and some soldiers then tried to find an escape route. Suddenly, Al rushed out with a tent and hid right among the small monsters. Though they saw him, they left after he hid in the tent. Al quickly ran back and told the commander about his experiment. He noticed that while mannequins on the upper floor were shattered, one inside a tent remained intact. Thus, he realized these monsters identified humans by their shape. So he wanted everyone to find a way to escape with him. Everyone then took tents and prepared to move outside. They walked in a line and successfully got past the small monsters. Rebecca told Gazel to leave her with her former boss for a while. Gazel went outside while the official was ready to let Rebecca leave with the request for help, but with one condition. She pointed her gun at him and asked what the condition was. Soon after, deployment orders were sent to Al's team. The two girls quickly went with the main ship to pick up Al and the commander. The commander told Al he had a plan to deal with the monster. The two girls soon encountered the monster and lured it to chase them. Al approached from below, and the monster immediately released small monsters. Al had to constantly deal with the small monsters, so he couldn't approach the main monster. So the commander called the two girls and told them to attack when the monster opened its mouth to release the small monsters, and to make it release them, he would use himself as bait. He shot a missile at it, causing it to open its mouth and release small monsters. The two girls immediately flew up, fired into its mouth, and successfully eliminated the monster. Upon returning to the ship, Rebecca asked the commander not to be so reckless again because the team needed a leader like him. Not long after, Gazel and his team had a chance to investigate some things. He discovered that the singer Mirror at their previous base had been frequently performing everywhere lately. However, while they still had no information, his team tried to look carefully at Mirror's face, and when compared, it looked quite similar to Elena. Elena was quite confused now and might not even recognize that her name was Elena. But being on a mission, Fleur and Al had to ignore Elena's issues and focus on the mission first. Two light pillars appeared, and Al wondered where these monsters came from. George said this issue was still just theoretical, and no one had really proven where these monsters came from. Al then passed through the dust cloud and saw the cocoon, but didn't see the monster anywhere. He discovered a black smoke appearing and thought it was truth, so Al flew around to attack it. But when the two girls arrived, that smoke disappeared. From the ground, a black creature drew the chairman's face right when Fleur was speaking ill of her father. She felt embarrassed when the chairman's face appeared, so she fired to destroy that image. No one was sure if the monster really appeared this time, so for now they just went to retrieve the quartz ore first. During retrieval, some kind of sand suddenly entered Elena's robot. That evening, the chairman discussed some things with Gazel. He suspected that Elena and Mirror were the same person, so he went to a research facility where the chairman had found Elena. He revealed that this facility was established to create children to pilot robots. Countries would experiment on children to increase their compatibility with robots. However, Elena had trained at this base for 2 years, so he still believed Elena was completely normal. Gazel's friend believed that Elena couldn't both train at the base and perform somewhere far away in the world, so they wanted Gazel to abandon that thought. However, Truth told him he must try to seek the truth for the truth to come to him. We later learned that the US government had intentionally planted Mirror in the organization to find some secret information inside. However, in the past 2 months, they realized that the mirror they hired and the mirror they had been communicating with recently were not the same though similar in appearance. Their speaking and singing voices were very different. They then hypothesized that the mirror they had been communicating with could actually be Elena. Meanwhile, while the engineering team was maintaining the robots, the sand that had attached to Elena's robot suddenly spread out and possessed the 3 girls from Bruno's team. They began to lose their minds, got on a plane, and flew away. Elena was also possessed by the sand, which made her unable to distinguish whether she was truly Mirror or Elena. She then ran to Al's location. While he still didn't know what the smoke he encountered was, Elena ran in and hugged him, causing him to also get affected by the sand and follow her. The commander then discovered that the 3 girls from Bruno's team were suddenly flying in the sky and then abruptly fell. The engineers had to cut their power and go in to subdue and sedate them to stop their hallucinations. Floor experienced a similar situation and was also sedated to prevent resistance. They later found that the cause was this sand, which had properties similar to the fuel they used for robots. This only affected children whose brains had been modified to control robots. They wondered where Al and Elena were, as Al's case was naturally modified brain rather than through artificial experiments like the others. Elena had taken Al to watch Mirror perform. Mirror's colleague came and wondered where she had been all this time, but she shot her 2 colleagues and told Elena to leave together. She wanted to get Al out of this base because she believed they had been deceived there. They got into a car to try to escape the base, but the commander and soldiers blocked the road ahead. Al's hallucinations had changed at this point, and he began to see Elena and Mirror as his mother and Naru, causing Elena to suddenly pull Al out of the car and tell the commander to shoot down that vehicle. He had the soldiers open fire and burn Mirror in the car. We now know that the monster this time was that sand it had transformed into Mirror to deceive Elena. Meanwhile, the chairman had called Gazel back and told him to stop investigating. The U.S. military personnel had investigated Elena and found the house of the nanny who had taken care of Elena. But surprisingly, the real Elena had died. The current Elena was someone using the deceased Elena's identity. Naru and Truth were still at the cocoon, and Truth noticed that Naru was about to fully absorb the power from this cocoon. Naru wondered why Truth was only kind to her, and Truth said they were very similar, both seeking truth and rejecting this world. Naru admitted that Truth wasn't bad since he didn't kill Al. Meanwhile, Gazel had searched the base's basement and was discovered by the director. He wondered why they were there, and Gazel claimed he was an independent team under the chairman's authority, so he could go wherever he wanted. He questioned about them hiding quartz ore here, but the director said it wasn't stored here, but in another place, that place being the space station where Al's team was currently heading. The commander didn't like space, so he quickly led the group to the gravity area for easier movement. Al then met the commander of this space station, Hannah. He saw an AI similar to George, but it told him it was still George because it was an entire system, not just a single computer. Meanwhile, the Japanese military commander had met Truth again. He told Truth that he had found some interesting information about Truth, that he was once the adopted son of a scientist. Meanwhile, we learned that Al's group went to space because a cocoon had appeared in space and was expected to explode, causing many fragments to fall to Earth. Therefore, this mission would help their organization gain worldwide respect. But if they failed, all sponsors would abandon them. Al wondered about the security team at this space station, and Fleur explained that the team only had the duty of protecting the quartz ore that the organization had collected. For other matters, they would only provide support rather than directly participate. Al was ready for battle, but was suddenly shocked when he could no longer see the wind paths. Commander Hannah seemed to realize something and told Al to return while the 2 girls waited for orders. Rebecca asked him about the wind paths, and he told her that he had always seen and flown following them. Everyone then realized that Al had always been able to see atoms that normal people couldn't see. Al didn't understand how people knew so much about him, and they thought he might be an alien because years ago, The military had recorded his plane appearing from a light pillar similar to the cocoons and monsters, and his mother had fallen from that plane to Earth. Everyone then thought they shouldn't let Al fight, partly because he would have difficulty maintaining stability while acting and partly because they worried he might have to fight his own kind. But Al remained confident that he was fine and could fight if he was more careful. They then began to plan for Al, saying he just needed to fly straight along the orbit and crash into the cocoon to change its trajectory. The commander said if they deviated from the orbit, they would take responsibility and rescue Al. They later encountered the monster, and the two girls stood from afar to support and help Al get closer to it. He tried to shoot it down but was swallowed inside. However, no one worried because Al destroyed it from within and escaped. Al then used a debris piece to push himself toward the cocoon, but a Japanese satellite suddenly shot at the cocoon, causing it to split and continue falling straight to Earth on its original trajectory. Al was thrown onto it and couldn't change the cocoon's direction, so he was about to be pulled down by gravity along with this cocoon. Though they weren't worried about the cocoon, they were concerned because Al wouldn't survive the temperature when entering the atmosphere. Floor wanted to help Al, but the chairman wouldn't allow it. However, the commander told Al to hang on because he would find a way to save him. Suddenly, a hole appeared in the cocoon where Naru was, and it also opened near Al's location. He hid inside it and surprisingly found a machine inside. The cocoon began to split open, revealing a giant aircraft inside. A robot emerged from it, stepped forward, and waved for Al to come forward. Al was then protected by the ship and returned safely to Earth. When the ship fell into the sea, he and the other robot landed on it. But when Al left the cockpit, he was surprised to see that the pilot on the other side looked very much like his mother. She introduced herself as Eureka and didn't understand why Al had hair similar to hers. What is really happening? Let's wait for part 2 to learn more details.